Hello, welcome to the third of this series of webinars connecting with carers in COVID. Welcome to all of you in the audience and welcome to our subject for the evening, which is around how professionals are supporting carers and what we mean by good practice and how we keep attention to rights and entitlements in this very strange and different time. I'm Ruth Allen, I'm the Chief Executive of BASWA. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this session, which, like the others, is being run jointly with the British Association of Social Workers, my organisation, with the Royal College of Nursing, and with the National Collaborating Centre for Mental Health, which is part of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and crucially, of course, with experts by experience, colleagues who are or have been family carers and have been very involved in supporting carers and also people and another colleague who's been a user of services. And we're also joined today by two practitioners who will be talking about their current experience during COVID. So if I could just ask my colleagues to introduce themselves, I'll go around starting with you, Matthew.
Hi everyone and welcome. My name is Matthew McKenzie, former carer for 20 years. My current role is supporting carers through care forums around in South London. I engage with several mental health trusts, South London and Maudsley, South London, St George's, Oxley's, West London. But mainly my view as a former carer is to engage with carers and to advocate and help them gain experience of health and local authority services. So that's me.
Thanks, Matthew. Antonia, could I come to you next?
Yes, thank you, Ruth. My name is Antonia Zama. I'm an expert by experience, also a manager of a mental health drop-in centre in South West London. I'm also will be starting work as a crisis support worker at the South West London St George's Mental Health Trust.
Thank you, Antonia. Kath, can I come to you? Catherine Gamble. You're muted.
Yes, good evening, everybody. I'm Catherine Gamble. I'm the Royal College of Nursing Mental Health Lead, and I have the pleasure of working with Antonia and Matthew in South London. And we've shared a lot of what we've learned over the last three weeks now, and I'm looking forward to this in our final one. But we've had a lot to share, and I'm delighted to also have in partnership.
Thanks, Kath. Can I come to Tom? Tom is with us, but you can't see him at the moment. You will see him a bit later. He's in the gloaming. Tom, could you introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, I'm a mysterious voice off camera at the moment, but hi everyone, my name's Tom Ayres. I'm Director for the National Collaborating Centre for Mental Health. Really pleased to be joining you for the third of these webinars, and hopefully I'll be on camera later when it comes to my bit.
Thank you. And Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily Poole. I'm the Patient and Carer Engagement Lead at Langdon Hospital, which is a forensic medium and low secure hospital down in Devon. I work within a team which also works within the wider OT team, and it's really nice to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you. And last but not least, Mary.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name's Mary Buckman. I'm the Associate Director of Social Care for Oxford Health NHS Foundation Trust, and I'm also a practicing AMP, which is an approved mental health professional in Buckinghamshire.
Thank you. Those of you who've joined us previously on webinars will know that you have a chat or question box on your screens, which allows you to send comments, messages, and ask questions. Please do send those through during the session, and do think about doing it as early as possible. We're very interested in what you have to say, any comments, and obviously particularly any questions for panelists. So please do use that. We won't be able to answer all of your questions perhaps, but they will certainly be important for us and will help us think about any other work that we want to do in this context on this subject. So we're talking today about what professionals are or should be doing to support carers and families through the COVID crisis. And we'll be reflecting a bit on some of the previous sessions that we've done, some of the learning that we've gained as we've talked together as four of us as a group, five of us. And also today we'll be thinking about the professional responsibilities and looking at some examples of professional responses to supporting mental health carers right now. Thinking about legal entitlements and rights in social care and under legislation such as the Mental Health and Mental Capacity Act. So we hope that this will be informative and supportive, and I would draw your attention to the fact that, as in previous sessions, you've got some handouts which you can access through your chat box, and there may also be some other resources that we will put up after when this webinar goes live. And of course, it's freely available on the BASWA website with links through from the Royal College of Nursing and RC Psych websites available for anybody who wants to watch it afterwards. For the next slide, please. I just wanted to draw your attention to some of the national work that's going on to understand the impact on carers and families during this time across the UK. This slide comes from the work that Carers UK did in April, so in the early part of lockdown, about the implications for carers of the stay-at-home policy and the impact on services. Again, this is in your resource pack and you can read it through in detail, but I think it's really important that we understand systematically through research and through the work of the national organisations, particularly Carers UK and Carers Trust, that we're understanding the patterns of impact on carers and families, both in terms of their experiences at home with their loved ones, but also in terms of their experience services during this time. I'm hoping that these kinds of surveys will continue at a national level, so that can feed in to the ongoing need for services to respond and be abreast of what it's like for families to be supporting people through difficult times during this crisis. Go to the next slide, please. Just a couple of bits of recapping on what we did in the previous webinars, so do have a look at them if you haven't seen them. In the first webinar, we really focused quite a lot on the experience from the carers and families' point of view, what was people were finding worrying and stressful, and the experience that carers were having of variation in service response, and particularly around continuity of support, and the fact that certain kinds of support just weren't available to them anymore after lockdown and the service changes. There was quite a lot about the fears that people had for the people they're caring for, their family members, their friends, and particularly concerns about inpatient admission and the risks associated with inpatient admission and hospitalisation around COVID infection. But we also heard some really positive things, particularly around peer support. And quite a lot of that was about how online support had provided a great opportunity for organisations and for carers to join together. So that was very heartening. We were joined in that session by Wendy from the North East, who was providing many very innovative support services online, in which she previously provided face-to-face. No substitute for face-to-face support, but the online and digital offers have been really coming through as very, very important where people have access to them. That's obviously very important too. Next slide, please. And then in webinar 2, we looked at some of the principles of good care and family support and how that's been affected during the time of COVID. So we were really looking back, all of us who've worked in this field have been affected by it in many ways, thinking about how the importance of promoting peer support, the importance of involvement and co-production not being lost through this time, and as we come out the other side, how carers continue to influence the shape of services now and as we move through this pandemic. We talked about confidentiality and information sharing and good practice there and how that's affected by COVID. And we talked about communication skills for carers and families and the importance principles of those that are just as important now and perhaps particularly important where people are living perhaps in more intense situations, where going out, even after the relative easing that we're having going out may be not possible, may be difficult, and of course some families will be shielding, and so they will be in that lockdown situation still. Go on to the next slide. So today we are presenting and discussing some examples of good professional practice, providing information and perspectives on social care and mental health law, rights and entitlements during COVID, hearing some multi-professional voices, which I think is really important, all the different disciplines and professions, the people with lived experience, people of different professions in health and care, talking together about how we need to pull together to continue to provide great support. And examples of that I'm sure will be coming through, and then taking questions. So please, again, put things in the chat box, ask questions, we really need that. So next slide, please. Oh, actually, before we go on to Matthew, I'm going to, stay there, stay on that one. I'm going to go to Antonia because this is Mental Health Awareness Week, and when we were planning this, we were thinking about the fact we'd like to really mark that. And there is a theme, I understand, for Mental Health Awareness Week, which is about kindness. And we would like now just to have a slot with Antonia talking about mental health awareness, kindness and carers. So over to you, Antonia.
Thank you, Ruth. Yes, as Ruth mentioned, it is Mental Health Awareness Week and the theme is kindness. Kindness is defined as being friendly, generous and considerate to others. And research shows that people who are kind and compassionate see clear benefits to their well-being and happiness. So let's take a look at how kind we are to ourselves, which is something those of us who have mental health issues. Well, they say charity begins at home, and I think kindness does too. There are different levels of giving with charity, as there are different levels of kindness and compassion as well that people show. Charitable giving depends on our financial wealth. For those who give a large amount, that's very few. And then there are those who give a medium amount, which isn't as generous as a large amount, but it's still welcome and it's given by a few more. And there are those who give a small amount, which is the most popular amount, and it's given by almost everyone. And the same applies to kindness and compassion. But the amount we give depends on our mental wealth. And wealth in any form, whether financial or mental, needs to be regularly topped up to maintain it at a healthy level. Carers show a generous amount and more of care, love, kindness and compassion to others. They don't have a problem giving to others or prioritizing other people over themselves. They take the time to care. But for many carers, the challenge is finding the time to give themselves a fraction of the same care, love, kindness and compassion they show to others. Can they spare 30 minutes or an hour to focus on their own self-care? Stop and take the time to give themselves a break, or treat themselves as they are treating the cared for person. Self-care is an important part of showing kindness and compassion towards ourselves. In our words, actions, and everyday thoughts, as well as the things you can physically do to take care of yourself. I'll now hand over to Matthew, who will take us through some of the things we can all do to physically take care of ourselves and show ourselves.
Thank you.
Antonia. Over to Matthew.
Okay, can I have the next slide, please? And the next slide, thanks. That's great. So basically, due to time, I'll just briefly go through what I believe is the 5 ways to well-being, which can be applied to everyone, but I'm taking this from let's say a carer's sort of perspective. And basically the 5 ways to well-being, because it's Mental Health Awareness Week, it's I'd say it's like mental health messages aimed at improving mental health and well-being for the whole population. And I think these were developed by the New Economics Foundation, and adopted by the government and the NHS to aid in health and well-being. So I'm just going to go through each of the 5 ways from a carer's perspective. Obviously, they can be used by anyone, but this is aimed at carers. And the very first one obviously would be connect with other people, more important now than ever due to the COVID situation. And the reason is that it helps foster good relationships that are important to your mental well-being. The benefits to this would be obviously to give an opportunity to share positive experiences, not always be brought down by negative experiences, which can be easy to find in this time of crisis. The other benefits, obviously, to connecting to other people would be, provide emotional support for yourself and allow others to support yourself. Like what I do with the carers, the virtual carer support groups and the virtual carers forums. An example would be, let's say, try turning off the TV for a moment and just ring friends. You don't have to physically be there, but ring around, see how people are. A lot of volunteering has been coming up during this day and age, during the COVID situation. So that's a way of connecting to others and the community. The next point is being physically active again, quite important nowadays. Not easy because of the social distances that we have to do. But being active is, not only great for your physical health and fitness, there's evidence that it can improve your mental well-being. And, the benefit would be raising self-esteem, chemical changes in the brain that can positively change your mood. Another good example, obviously, I've seen a lot of people doing this nowadays. I see a lot of joggers out there jogging around the place. And I know it's not easy as a carer, you're caring for someone, but it's so important to be physically active as you can. Even if you don't have to go out, you can be at home trying something physically challenging for yourself. The third one would be to learn new skills. Again, which shows that learning new skills can also improve your mental well-being in a way of boosting your self-confidence and again raising self-esteem, building a sense of purpose, and again helping. It can link to other things, helping you to connect to others. And a good example that I have found is an initiative launched by Carers UK called Learning for Living, which is aimed at carers. It's an online platform aimed at carers in a way where they can learn about how they can apply what they've done in their lives, caring for others, and apply that into some form of skill set which can perhaps be used in the job market. The last two, give to others, that again shows that giving and kindness can also help improve well-being. And how that can benefit you is that the feeling of a purpose and self-worth is enhanced. Again, it helps you connect to others. And I did mention that volunteering is a way to get giving to others. I know it's difficult during this time, but it is a way that you can aid yourself in well-being. And the last one, which is a difficult, I know all of these are challenges, but it's so important for your well-being. Only you can benefit if you try these. Pay attention to the present moment, which is one of the core aim of mindfulness. And that would be like, what I tend to do. I often try and meditate. I know it sounds a bit, airy fairy, but it's important. It helps you to distract all the negativity that's coming out of this day and age. And it's so important to remind yourself what is important to yourself, silence, the horror and the despair around you. It's not easy, but it's worth trying. So all I can say to carers is please have a look through these, share these with others. It is good for your well-being. And I'll finish up on that. If there's any questions anyone wants to ask, I'm happy to answer one question, and then I can go on to the next slide. What is it? Okay, so we're on to the next slide. This is more about carers' needs and the Care Act. So what I'm going to try and do here is what I've noticed. Two care organisations, that being Carers Trust and Carers UK, from what I've noticed, what they are doing, obviously they're doing a whole lot more, but due to time I can't describe all what they're doing, but what they're doing in campaigns regarding advocating for carers and the COVID-19 crisis situation. And then what I'm going to do is just give a little highlight on the joint statement made by Carers Trust and Carers UK to gently remind the government or the powers that be, because of the fear of the COVID-19 bill, which may distance itself more from the Care Act, and also changes. I suppose there was going to be a lot of talk on changes to the Mental Health Act. But anyway, basically the current campaigns from, I'll start with Carers UK, the current campaigns I believe they're doing, what I've noticed was the coronavirus protecting your mental well-being. Again, spot on in regards to Mental Awareness Week, and that's aimed at carers. Where, I mean, I can provide a link later on, which can be included in the resource, and that's aimed at carers and how they can protect their well-being during the COVID-19 situation. I believe Carers UK is also doing Speaking Up for Carers, another campaign. Another one they're doing is Carers Behind Closed Doors, who are often forgotten families of the coronavirus outbreak, and still pushing for also the testing of carers and the protective equipment of unpaid carers. We mustn't forget that it's important front lines, NHS workers get the equipment, but also carers as well. We can't forget them. And also the continuing campaign, Learning for Living. Obviously, it's a brilliant resource which can do online. Carers can do online. They can do that in their own time. And another campaign they're doing is the I think it's a Carer Confident benchmark aimed at employers. So that way, it's like a benchmark to test the employment industry if they have carers employed at work. I'm moving to Carers Trust, what they're doing in regards to the campaign. Obviously, they were one of the major leads for Triangle of Care. And one of the campaigns they're doing is obviously taking care of yourself. So again, and I think something on the site aimed at carers to focus on their well-being. And also, I believe they're helping push for virtual couples, so that way carers can connect with each other. Remember the 5 ways of well-being, first one being connect to others, so you can still use virtual online chats to connect to other carers. And I think that's mainly done by Mobilize, another organisation. Now, what I will do, due to time, we'll focus on the joint statement, which was made by Carers UK and Carers Trust to remind the government about the importance of the Care Act. What we don't want is that the coronavirus completely pushes all those rights and obligations aimed at local authorities and health services that focus so much on the coronavirus that they may forget families and carers out there still struggling. So if I start by, let's say, carers at work rights, if you're a carer and you're working, also if you've got NHS staff who are carers. Carers UK and Carers Trust mentioned in their joint statement that all employees must consider what might happen for their staff if they need to provide unpaid care and if something happens to them. This leads on to support for carers in specific situations. If a carer became unwell with COVID-19, what will happen? What are the ways to reduce the burden on the carer and the cared for? Also, a lot of fear is how the COVID-19 and the coronavirus affects services. If services are withdrawn so quickly due to infection rates, how will this affect families and carers? Next one is identifying carers, the third one down, and that basically looks at trying to remind the government that there's still an obligation for health and social care to still identify carers, even more importantly, hidden carers, and use that data to show that it's valid what to do. You can't, if you're not measuring how many families and carers are out there, then how can you prove certain policies are working? Going on to nutrition, obviously food and nutrition, not only for the care, but for the cared for. It's important that carers be recognised as protected workers due to, perhaps the identity we're hearing like clap for carers, but that unfortunately takes away the identity for carers who are always struggling to have the identity and their voice is heard. So it's important that food and nutrition regards to carers, and we've seen a lot of food banks struggling because certain shops are always open. And obviously poverty is hitting carers who are working at that time. So it's important that any new bill takes note of this. Going on to the last three, and I'll be fairly quick. The use of mental health services are going to be crucial even after in a post COVID situation. Again, still continuing to support carers, not just the cared for, care assessments for carers, and also young carers. Again, those, if you think it's hard enough for carers to get that voice across, young carers is almost doubly as hard. And loneliness and isolation, one of the most crucial aspects of today's situation. Carers already experience loneliness and isolation, and these carers must be identified. And the last bit was BAME carers. I added that bit in because of my former carers experiences. I do feel, again, it's difficult, I suppose, for BAME carers to be identified. So that's my bit. And I'd like to point out one last bit. The reason why I had this poor person scratching their head on this slide there is that there's so much in regards to the Care Act. You can't expect the carer to read for all the Mental Health Act changes. It's a nightmare, and that's why we need these organisations, Carers UK, Carers Trust, to continue to advocate for families and carers. So that's my bit. I'll pass over to Ruth.
Matthew, thank you very much. Yes, so if we go on to the next slide, we're going to kind of continue with some of these themes in a little bit more detail. So thank you for raising all of them. Yeah, if we go to the next slide, these handouts, you have other related handouts. I wanted just to say a couple of things before Mary talks about the work that she's doing in her area in relation to this in particular. There's been changes in legislation through coronavirus across the UK. I'm just going to England, although there are similar issues happening across the other nations. One of the key things is that there has been emergency legislation which has allowed local authorities to potentially reduce some of what they provide, to go from things being duties down to powers temporarily. So actually to reduce some of the detailed planning and so forth. I wanted just to say that only a very number of local authorities have actually enacted these, and for the vast majority of carers, it's really important that as professionals or as peer supporters, we know and we're sharing the message that most of the care powers are in place in most parts of England, and these rights remain in place. So go to the next slide, please. Matthew was, if you go on to the next slide, thanks. I'll have a look at that in your own time. Matthew is just saying, really raising the rights and entitlements for carers are quite confusing, actually, quite often. And as professionals, we really have a huge role in clarifying and advocating and making the messages as simple as possible about what the basics are that carers can access, and to advocate for that, because it's not always that easy to get what you want from local authority. So just a few key messages here, that local authorities, they must provide advice and information about rights to an assessment. They must provide assessment for any carer that they think might need support in the future. You can have an assessment irrespective of whether or not the person you care for is getting help from the local authority. And if you have eligible needs, you can get support and services. If you go to the next slide, please. And next slide, actually, I'll just go over these quite quickly. And as I said, there is also about an eligible need to relate to whether somebody's caring responsibilities, whether you're an adult. And of course, young carers are hugely important in all of this. That's a whole other topic that would do with a session. But if your caring responsibilities are affecting your mental or physical health, or you're at risk of that, and you are restricted from doing certain daily things, such as, and here's just some of the examples, preparing food and eating well, having personal relationships, being able to go to work or finding time for social activities. others as well that are listed out, then you can be eligible for support from the local authority under the Care Act, and that remains in place in the majority of local authorities during. So, but of course, the way in which can fulfil these things is affected by the impact on services, the impact on resources, and on the physical that people are often now living in. Either they're in a lockdown situation potentially, or they may be shielding somebody from and a household that is really even more restricted. And then services not being able to go in because of infection risk is also absolutely crucial. So, but the rights and entitlements are still there. And even under those so-called Care Act easements, they're only attenuated, kind of reduced, and it is a thing. And it's really important we hold on to rights and entitlements for carers, because there's a lot of work went into fighting for them, and they're enshrined in law. So, the next slide, I'm going to ask Mary now to come in. And Mary, you're going to talk about some of your experience as a social care leader in mental health, about how people are getting access to support and services through the Care Act in the first instance. So can I hand over to you?
Thank you, Ruth. And I just want to echo really that really important point that Ruth and Matthew have both highlighted, which is that all bar a very small proportion of some councils who have brought in the Care Act easements, your rights have not changed. What may have changed, however, is how those assessments are undertaken. So what we're finding is an increasing number of full assessments are being undertaken over the phone, whereas previously we might have had some initial conversations over the telephone before arranging a face-to-face assessment with a member of staff. Now, for reasons that are probably quite clear, where we have staff working from home, we have service users and carers shielding, that waiting to do a face-to-face assessment just isn't the right thing to do. And what we're finding is that actually we can get a good quality assessment over the telephone. So you might find that's offered to you. Once an assessment is completed, if you're deemed to be eligible for services, as Ruth's just outlined, there are a number of different ways that people can be eligible to receive services as a carer to support you in that caring role. What we might find is that actually what's available out there for you at the moment is very limited. So I would have an expectation that the professional who's working with you to undertake the assessment is able to have a conversation with you about thinking very creatively at the moment about what would be helpful. When we talk particularly sometimes about carers breaks or carer support, we're often thinking of ways to support the carer to get out of the home, or the cared for person to come out of the home for a period of time, to give the carer and the cared for person a break from each other. Sometimes that's one of the main things that's asked for. And that clearly is one of the main things that's very difficult to provide at the moment. So it's having that opportunity to talk about, well, how could you have a break without going out? Or is there a way, for example, that carers funding could be used to support IT if you don't have it, if you don't have an iPad or a tablet or a laptop or some kind of internet connection that could facilitate you to have contact with other loved ones or other support networks? That's something, for example, that could be considered. But I think that the message I want to give is very much about thinking creatively. So if you're about to have an assessment, or if you think you're entitled to an assessment, start thinking about what would be helpful for you. But also, it's not all about you coming up with ideas. Very much talk to the professional about what they know is available, and put some onus back on them as well to come up with creative ideas about how to support you to continue in the caring role, not only in the current COVID situation, but also as things move forward, as we move hopefully out of the current lockdown and back towards a normal way of living. So I think that's really important. Ruth?
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, we were talking earlier about the fact that we really do need to think very creatively and really imagine ourselves into the situation of people living perhaps in situations which we can no longer visit. And of course, if we don't know people well, imagining what it's like for them and how they can create some of, how do you create a respite space when you can't leave the house? Some of those other things that Tom was mentioned, that Matthew was mentioning about 5 ways to well-being might be very important there. Do you think it's sort of the mindfulness, thinking about other ways to enhance your well-being when perhaps you can't physically separate from if the family has little space or whatever? Do you think that professionals currently practicing during this time are able to think in those kind of creative ways with carers? Do you think people have the time to have those conversations over the telephone with carers at the moment? Do you think that's a difficulty?
I think things are very difficult at the moment, but that's not to say that we shouldn't have the time. It is about trying to maintain doing the right thing in the right way to the right level of quality. So if you are having contact with a professional about how your caring role has affected you, you should have the right amount of time with that professional to have that conversation. When I talk about carers' rights to groups of carers and very much to staff as well, one of the main rights I always talk about is the right to say no, and the right to say, actually, I can't cope anymore. And one of my concerns at the moment is the current COVID situation and lockdown and shielding, basically the whole context in which we're all living, means that carers may feel that they have no option but to carry on. So I think at the moment, with the additional pressures and the additional stresses that carers and cared for people may be experiencing, that it's even more important to be able to say, I don't think I can carry on. I maybe could manage before. I could just about manage before when I was having time out. Maybe I was going to work, maybe I was going to a support group or having respite coming in, sitting service, for example. None of that is happening anymore, and I can no longer continue. And I think it's really important to say, if that is how you're feeling at the moment, to have that conversation and make that clear, because professionals should have that time to be able to talk with you about that.
One of the things that seems to be coming up is that we're hearing more about possibly more mental health act assessments coming through, and of course sometimes that will be sparked by a family member raising the issue, and also that people who perhaps previously not been known to services may be finding the current situation with particular stresses are coming through. And I think you said that's something that you found in your local area, but it's also something that we've been finding elsewhere. And I guess there's a principle in here, linking it to your last point, about family members asking for help as early as possible, because it may be, I mean, we've been seeing people not referring themselves for physical health support, and death rates rising, and people not going to A&E. There's an equivalence, I think, maybe here. If people aren't seeking mental health support for themselves, but also for their family members, then that could tip into further crisis. I just wondered, we're terribly short time, unfortunately, but if you just maybe just make a little comment on that, and just any key highlights from what's happening around mental health act assessments and impact on carers and families at the moment.
Absolutely. And the first port of call, if you're not currently having support from a mental health service, is through your GP. So we know GP surgeries have all adapted how they're offering care. They're all available over the phone. So phone your GP surgery and make an appointment to have a phone consultation with your GP or your cared for person's GP, the person you're concerned about. And yes, you're right, Ruth. Certainly what we're observing and what we've noticed locally is that we are getting an increasing number of people being assessed under the Mental Health Act. So that's the assessments that can result in people being detained under the Mental Health Act, or sectioned is the term often used. And some of those referrals that are coming through are for people who have no previous history of mental illness. So no previous history with us as mental health services. And the context of COVID has brought something out that has resulted in some kind of very acute mental health issue. Now, for carers in that service who probably have never thought of themselves as carers. We know that the carer itself is a difficult term even for people who do acknowledge the role they've taken on. But if a loved one who you live with in your household is experiencing acute mental illness for the first time in this situation, it's must be incredibly difficult. But GP is always the first port of contact. Moving on to Mental Health Act assessments, again, we're in this context of where we're doing a lot of healthcare virtually, whether it's over the telephone or whether it's virtual appointments similar to this webinar where we're using video conferencing. And at the moment, as it stands, we can't really do Mental Health Act assessments like that. The law and the guidance that we have to work to hasn't caught up with technology, which is not unusual with the law. But what we've had this week is some guidance from the Department of Health about how this technology can be used. So each local area is required to come up with a local protocol about how that will work. So instead of needing at least 3 people in the room together assessing someone on a face-to-face basis, that it might be that some of that assessment process could happen with one or other of those individuals being on the end of the phone or on the end of a video link. And it is about the risk of COVID. It's about, we've never really thought about contagion. Mental Health Act assessments are pretty much all about risk. Is the person too unwell to stay safely at home? Risk is what we think about. We've never really had to think about risk of contagion of an illness before in that context. So that's this added context in which Mental Health Act assessments are happening. And we have to think about what happens when someone is admitted. Ordinarily, if someone's admitted, their loved ones can visit them in hospital, can see where they are, can be reassured, or at least have contact with them and reassure each other that they're still there to support them. Visits to wards at the moment aren't possible, so visits from loved ones are happening virtually as well. So there's lots of things that are different about being admitted to hospital, and that's part of the wider context of Mental Health Act assessments that we're having to take into account. But if you are the carer of someone who's being assessed under the Mental Health Act who may be detained and admitted, you should still be very much involved in that process. The approved mental health professional should be making contact with you by phone, which is often the way we do it initially anyway. So you should have a really good opportunity to talk through what's happening that you're aware of. So there'll be some things that are very different. There'll be some things that will be happening the same. Ruth.
Yeah, thank you very much for that sort of whistle-stop tour, but very important, and that the importance of family, nearest relative, but also wider family liaison must be there even under these very pressured times. It's so crucial, obviously for everybody's well-being, but also for the ongoing support for that for all involved. Mary, thank you very much. I'm going to hand over now to Tom and Emily. And I'm also going to disappear like into a magician's hat or whatever it is, so that Tom can become visible magically. So I may or may not see you all again. I'm not quite sure how this is going to work, but I'm going to switch my camera off and Tom is going to join.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Hopefully I'll be able to join in a second visually as well. So hello everyone. At the National Collaborating Centre, one of the things that we've been doing over the last few weeks is trying to pull together and find out a whole range of really practical things that services are doing and to support the changes that are being made around the context of COVID and the current crisis. And we've done that in particular in order to focus on communication with carers and service users and within mental health services, and we've created, it's in the resource pack that's available as part of this webinar. We've created a sort of a change theory around communication where we try to bring together a whole range of really quite practical things that people are doing. I'm not going to go through the change pack now, that will take the whole hour, but I will, what I wanted to do is focus on just one of those examples. I'm really pleased that Emily can be with us from Devon Partnership Trust to talk about some work that they've been doing to think and how they thought about communication with carers around their service over the last 2 months. So if we go to the next slide, please. And Emily, I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the context of the service at Langdon Hospital and what you thought you might need to do differently once the COVID crisis situation hit in March.
Okay, thank you. So basically, we have 111 beds there. So that was 111 men who weren't able to have anybody to visit. So that's obviously huge for them and huge for their carers and their friends and relatives too. So what we wanted to do was basically be available, be informative, and be reassuring, I think, in a nutshell. So we're doing various things. We're sending out weekly updates, and we're sending out various other things that kind of go with them, which are drawn from this really good resource folder, which is pretty huge, that we have. And so we can draw on that. That was put together by our OT team, and everybody contributes to it, including carers are now sending me stuff to put into that pack as well, which is really nice. So that's kind of there to share. We also, because we were having to kind of, I mean, it's a very strange and gloomy time, so it was very important to us to put out some positive stuff too. And we started by adding little positive bits to the updates. And then one of the OTs on the ward that she was working on came up with this excellent PowerPoint, and she would just add things and we'd add things too, and this PowerPoint just grew, and it was full of positive things. And it then became the patient voice, which you can just see in the middle there, which we co-produce with patients, and we have been inviting carers to contribute to that as well. And that goes out on a 2 weekly basis. We can give that to all our patients and also send it out to the carers as well. And the focus on that is just keeping things positive, and also it's very timely. We have a sort of quarterly newsletter, but by the time that goes out, you know, it's not contemporaneous at all. So this is very immediate. They can see what we did last week. They can see what we're working on now, and it's been really useful, I think, just because they can't be there, to have that and be able to send that out. So that's where we're at. We've got it's being done by a couple of people who are shielding during crisis, a couple of staff, and then we collect information from patients and contributions from patients, and also some staff, and send that all to them. And our peer support work is also shielding, has been working on that too. So it's a nice sort of cooperative thing, really.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. And can you give us a couple of examples of what is in the kind of resource folder? Sure. You said, I think, yeah.
So one of our patients is very interested in druidism, and as part of that, the tree system that they use, which contains 18 trees, and he has been identifying them on our site. So our guys get 30 minutes ground leave. We're really lucky, we have huge grounds, so and we have lots of old trees. So he's been researching where the trees are. He's found 13 so far, and you can see, oh, actually that's, yeah, it's the next issue, not that one. So he's putting together a chart which will enable other patients on leave to go and find these trees. So that's one of the things. The one that you can see there, just tiny on the picture, is we were celebrating the Japanese Cherry Blossom Festival. So there's a lot of things that sort of going on, and we'll just put them in. We were talking about kindness, the theme of kindness. So that's our theme this week. And we've got random acts of kindness boxes up on the wards, and we've got a kindness tree with people's handprints and things that we've written about them that are nice, and so there's a real good feel-good factor to that, and that will go into the next newsletter, so we can share that with the carers. So a lot of things like that. Also, this week, one of the patients has interviewed a social worker, and that will be in just a little bit about her, a sort of all about me thing. So it's quite sort of flexible, but it's quite immediate.
Yeah, What sort of feedback have you had from carers and well, patients, but also carers to the work you've done?
So we're getting really good fit. So the patient voice is fairly new. Before that, we had the positive news anyway going out to them, and then we've got the weekly updates and the association bits that go with that. So and the feedback has been very positive. They're very pleased to have the regular updates. They're very reassured, I think, because each update starts with, we have no cases in the hospital. We haven't, so it's great to be able to put that and just start there. Then we'll do, you know, something about the changes, like, you know, when we started wearing masks or scrubs or that kind of thing. So they're kind of on base. We've got something about a new hospital in Exeter this time. Then we'll go on to what we're doing in the hospital, you know, what the patients have been up to. And then I usually end up with some useful links. So it might be TalkWorks, or it might be, oh, this week I put in one, but there's a big increase in fraud. So it was just a link to that if they wanted to check that out. So there are sort of various useful things that just go in there. I've had quite a lot of direct communication. I think the other thing is that it's really nice for them to have a person that they can get in touch with, and I can then signpost them. And sometimes they just want to talk and they'll phone and talk, and that's absolutely fine too. But sometimes they'll want particular information and I'll signpost them. So
yeah, it strikes me that you're sort of through this work have been sort of creating a community between staff, patients, and carers that's really quite that feels really quite mutually beneficial for everyone. And I wonder, what I'm wondering is whether that actually, in a funny way, that's something that's better now than it was pre-COVID, and whether actually this is improved things that you'd want to keep, you know, in the future as well.
I definitely would want to keep it. I mean, practically when we come out of lockdown, it won't be a weekly update, but it could be a monthly update. I would like to do that. I'm also thinking, because we're starting to use Skype with our patients for things like our patient council and the governance groups that they sit on. And so I would really like to start offering some peer support groups for carers on Skype, and I think that would be really good. We've kind of tried that physically before, but it's been difficult because people are so spread out, and I think this might be a really great way to more easily facilitate that. Anyway, I'm going to try, but I think definitely we've always had a pretty good core group of carers, and we're you know, making e-learning and doing lots of exciting stuff, but to bring that wider, I think is really exciting, and I definitely plan to pursue that and save the bits that are working well.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing it with us, Emily. I could ask you several more questions, but I feel I probably shouldn't because of time. I'll hand over to Kath, who I think is going to manage the final bit of the session. Although she's looking at me like she's not sure if she is.
I am, and I hope we haven't lost Ruth. I've got loads of questions from that Langdon Hospital, and to thank you, Emily and Tom, for sharing that. I think what we wanted to just use these last few moments for, Antonia, I don't know if you've got any furthermore that you want to reflect on what the last sort of 3 weeks have brought up for all of us in some way, and we've just summarised what it's brought up for us.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes, I think the last 3 weeks has really helped us put carers' needs on the agenda. It's helped us to highlight the problems they face, the issues there are, and also I think to think about the cared for people as well, and how best to improve relationships, improve communication, and also what is available there, because I think things to do with the Care Act and the mental health assessments, and the fact that maybe carers or family members may start struggling with their mental health. I think that it has helped us highlight that, and hopefully we have helped steer and guide people to what is actually happening and what's available. And also to be aware that the hospitals are still open, and they're working as best they can with the new COVID situation, and they are still running assessments, and they're still taking in patients. And yes, everything is still working, but it's probably at a different pace, and people are taking time to adapt to the new situation that COVID has put us in.
Thank you. Yes, I would agree, and I think that what we've been in a position to do over the last couple of weeks is to really look at what is out there and how we best sort of connect people. And I'm just very struck by what everybody is doing in Devon and supporting that. And I know that there are very good practices going on in different parts of the country, and how important it is to connect that up. And I believe that, Tom, you're in a pivotal position in terms of the improving health and safety. The network is providing a really useful way of connecting with that. I don't know if you just want to say the last few words on that.
I can do so. I mean, we, as I said, we've been working to try and source examples of good practice or innovative things that people are doing across the country to respond to COVID. We've got a network, a mental health improvement network, which you can access via our website, which is about trying to get staff who are working at any level and anywhere in mental health services and all social care services related to mental health, as an opportunity for them to share things that they're doing. We, as I said, we on Twitter, people search for me on Twitter, we share things every day that on social media that people are doing up and down the country in similar formats to the one you just see on the screen now, that's happening in Langdon Hospital, and we've put together two kind of packages to support two particular areas. One around communication, which, as I said, is linked, is in the resource pack on the webinar, and then the other are about restricted practice on mental health wards, which is another key issue, but obviously not something we've touched on at all during these webinars. Kath, I know Ruth's possibly still in the ether, hopefully, but I think we were wondering if there might be a couple of questions that we might want to feed in.
I'm trying to see whether there are questions. The challenge is Ruth back in?
Sorry, I'm sort of, yes, hello. I'm calling in from outer space. There are just a few comments I thought it would be worth picking up, because we haven't had, it's been packed full of content, and we haven't had a chance to pick up a lot of questions. There's a comment agreeing that providing carers with good news stories is vital. So that, I think, is a really clear statement, and I think that's come through, that balancing the reality of what people are going through with the way in which people are showing, amazing support for each other, or resilience, or finding new ways to support each other is really important. There's some comments here about GP practices can vary greatly if they are the route in for support. I don't know if anybody would like to comment on that, but I think we would probably know that, if you live in a very, very busy metropolitan area, often GP services are very, very stretched. It can be different in different places, and different levels of carer support. I don't know if anybody would like to comment on that.
Shall I pick that up, Ruth, or Matthew?
Yeah. Or Mary, yeah.
Yeah, shall I go first? Because I know I mentioned that the initial route in, if you're not currently known to services, is through your GP, is through primary care. But very much take on board, if the service you get from primary care is not responsive, that might be a non-starter for you. A lot of mental health services have what are called psychiatric liaison services through A&E departments. Now, for obvious reasons, A&E departments are not necessarily where people want to be at the moment, but if you're really in an acute crisis, you haven't got a good response from your GP, and you've tried 111 and you've tried to go through that again, 111 is also a good first point of contact, but equally can be difficult to get through to sometimes depending on demand. So I would say that the kind of the last resort safety net for finding your way in is to ask for psychiatric liaison at the local A&E department. But I'll pass over to Matthew, who may have more experience than me as a carer about how to access services.
Just to say, we're going to run slightly over, but so we will just go through a few more questions just to pick up. We'll have kindly put them in. So,
Well, to add to the previous question, obviously, yes, there certainly will be areas around the country where services are, straining to pick up families and carers and the loved ones. I'd like to mention the carers certainly go through health watches. They've still been very active virtually to get an idea on taking views from families and carers and patients about the services. So please go through them, and also go through, some GP surgeries do have patient participation groups. Certainly go through ways of looking to improve those GP surgeries as well. There are other avenues, and also the care centres. A lot of care centres around the country, they're also running their virtual groups to still keep connected with carers. So I think those three things, and there's more to it than that, but those three things are quite important. So that's my view.
Can I just, Ruth, I just wonder if I can come in about accessing GP services and then being stretched. It's worth saying that, I mean, people will know, but it's worth just reiterating that GP services have probably transformed more than any other service in the last 2 months in the context of COVID. And this is an anecdotal example of N equals 1, but my own GP practice that I had to access last week, where previously getting an appointment with a GP the same day was nigh on impossible unless you managed to dial in at 3 seconds to 9 o'clock in the morning, and even then you had to wait several days. But the experience was completely transformed because they're doing things online. I was able to get an online appointment within a matter of a couple of hours from requesting it, and I requested it in the middle of the day, and it all worked very well, and they dealt with the issue. I mean, it was an issue that was nothing to do with any of the issues that we're talking about now, but just the access I found the access to GP practices to be completely transformed, actually, in a positive way from what it has been in the past. And so I would say, yeah, so maybe there's a promising or an optimistic note about GP services that we should yeah, to add that voice, I suppose.
about so social workers having too much paperwork to do, impacting on their time with carers. I guess having too much bureaucracy and too much other things to do affects lots of different professions. And also, I think that point about GP surgeries becoming more efficient through cutting through how they usually do things and offering different ways of consulting. I suppose the question out of this is, are some of the things that we're learning about reducing bureaucracy and changing the way we do things going to provide more time for some contact with after COVID? Are we going to be able to reduce the unnecessary bureaucratic and administrative things that get in the way of providing direct support, whether that's virtually or return to face-to-face? One of the things we might learn.
Yeah, very much so. I think we're learning all the time about how we've had to adapt the way we're delivering services, the way staff are working. We have a lot of staff working from home, using technology from home, and even just reducing travel time frees up time to be doing other things. So we're certainly starting to have conversations, and I think most organisations are, about what are we learning from how we've adapted. As Tom's just said, GP practices have adapted, I think, more than any other service, but we've all adapted and had to deliver services different and have staff working in different ways from different bases. And we're having conversations about what have we learned from this that we will be continuing in the future. So I would be incredibly surprised if things go back to exactly the way they were before. I think we've learned a lot through this process.
Okay, well, a few things to close on that note. I think it's good to end. I think we've learned a lot by pulling together through a very short amount of time. My personal thanks to everybody who's worked with me, how we've worked together. So thanks to Catherine, Antonia, Emily, Tom, and also the unknown pet dog. We're really pleased to see is joined for the last part. Webinar. We will be taking away some of the learning from this. I've learned a lot personally. The information will be on the website. Please, colleagues, friends, and anybody else who may find these webinars useful, know that they exist. Look at the resources, and we will all continue to support carers and families who provide an amazing amount of support to our fellow citizens, and we couldn't do without them, and support them thoroughly through this and in the long term. So thank you all very much indeed, and good night.